everyone, I'm Liz. I grew up playing a lot of games, from Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on the Sega Genesis to Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo. I went on to Gran Turismo on the PlayStation 1 to my favorite as a youth, the Might and Magic and Heroes of Might and Magic series on PC, which I actually played from the young age of about 4 years old until I was about 18 or 19 years old. I played those games mostly with adults who always took time to talk with me about the importance of leaving make-believe in the games and having good citizenship in every other situation I was in. From gaming to being around others, it didn't matter. I had to be a good person. It was actually through another video game, Halo 3 matchmaking, that I met my husband.
Hi, my name is Chris. I started gaming at the early age of about 5 to 7 years old. Started with NES and the original Mario Bros. / Duck Hunt cartridge. I later moved up to the Sega Genesis, where I fell in love with a blue blur named Sonic the Hedgehog. I used to review games for a fan collaboration site named GameFAQs. After a few years of that, I started reviewing games for other sites, Games to Extreme, Digital Backspin, and VG Pub. It was then that one of the co-reviewers and I, and also my friend since high school, started a podcast named the VG Pubcast. Soon after, I met my wife Liz, or future wife Liz, through Halo 3 matchmaking. Liz then later joined our podcast.
And as gamers, and having grown up with the games that we knew and loved, like Mario Brothers and even the original Mortal Kombat games, where you couldn't see much violence, it has become a very troubling trend for Chris and I that many times we'll meet people who are buying a gift for a loved one, and they're doing it with all the best intentions. But what they're not understanding is, even though that looks like a fun game and all the commercials for it are amazing, it's probably not appropriate for your 8-year-old child to be playing it, or even for your 13 or 14-year-old child. And so we really felt it was important to start this podcast, this video series, about educating and just with the plan of education about these video games that are available on the market today.
One of my favorite YouTubers, the Video Game Historian, has already created a video about the formation of what's called the ESRB, or the Electronic Software Rating Board. They formed in 1994.
In his video, he really spends time talking about how the government stepped in and told the gaming industry, you have to have some kind of rating system so that people can have education on what they are purchasing.
Prior to that, each individual manufacturer did have their own rating system, but the government forced them to become standardized, which gave way to the modern rating system, E for everyone, EC for early childhood, teen, mature, adults only. We will go into what these ratings actually mean.
You know, some of you have probably seen that rating, RP, or rating pending, on commercials for video games, or when you're in the store looking at posters for games. All that means is the game hasn't actually received its rating yet, and before it actually comes to stores where you can purchase it, it will have a rating.
Okay, the rating system works by the game publishers have to submit a video sample of what they deem as the worst instances of potentially offending content or gameplay to the ESRB. There is a minimum of 3 employees that rate the game separately. If all employees rate the game the same, that becomes the game's rating. If they do not agree, then more raters are invited in to view the content and come to an agreement.
Okay, so that's maybe how some games that have some more violent scenes in them might be rated T, when some consumers might feel, that should almost be an M-rated game.
Right, and there are instances where, we'll cover this later, but where games come out with one rating, but through, let's say, modding, is the game actually ends up with a different rating.
Okay. And so we'll get into that a little bit later. Another interesting thing that you may see is, especially when you're talking about games that have online interactions, MMOs like World of Warcraft, Lord of the Rings Online, Elder Scrolls Online will all have this on them, where they'll have a rating, but then it will also say game experience may change during online play, or online play cannot be rated. And that's simply because while they have made sure that the content in the game itself falls under that particular rating, they really have no control over what people will say or do within the game structure or within the chat structure that the game has built into it.
And some games actually allow consumers to create either modifications or scenarios that you can play in the game.
Bethesda's a big one for that.
Bethesda is a big one. So is NCSoft.
Really? I didn't know NCSoft did that.
Yep, they released a game, Neverwinter, that allowed you to create scenarios.
I did not know. That's right, the dungeons.
Now
that you say that, I'm remembering that.
I believe they called that the Foundry. Yes.
Yes. One big one that I remember fondly was Morrowind, and that was my first experience with a game that you could download mods for, and so I remember enjoying. Like, I went through and played the whole game, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna download this house. I'm gonna download. Oh, I can get a horse, and so I remember finding some of those mods that you could play through, but the problem with those mods, like you said, is sometimes you got some questionable content. So I would download the mod, I'd go into it, and I'd be like, I didn't want that.
Bethesda, who is the creator, the developer of Morrowind, cannot be held responsible for user-generated modifications like that.
Exactly. So let's get into some of those different ratings. I'll start with talking about the EC rating. I found this one very interesting, just simply because I'd never heard of this rating before. That game rating is literally aimed toward very young children, and there's going to be no objectionable content in those games. I would think that those are purely going to be like educational games, almost like counting games, find the color games.
I would think so. Probably like those games you see on the Leapfrog systems for young children.
I guess we're going to find out in about 6 to 8 months when our little one joins the world. So
yes, we are.
It's going to be an interesting experience
and
learning about these young raiders.
Get a few Leapfrog systems or Leapfrog games as well.
I think we are.
The next one is E or K to A. Is E for everyone, which is what it's now called. It used to be K to A, which is kids to adults. According to the ESRB, games with this rating contain content which the ESRB believes is generally suitable for all ages. They can contain infrequent use of mild cartoon violence and adult language.
So what are they defining as mild?
I'm not exactly sure what they define as mild. Infrequent, I would think.
Because I guess for me, as a upcoming parent and also as an educator, I really don't appreciate when games that kids are playing have any kind of language in them.
Yeah, the ESRB website, which I pulled these definitions from, didn't really go into detail about that.
The next rating is another. You said this one was new, right?
I think it came out in 2004 is when they came out with this rating.
So newish.
Newish, yes.
And that's E10 plus. That's basically everyone 10 and older. The games with this rating are going to contain some content that the ESRB believes is pretty much suited for those aged 10 years and older. They can contain a greater amount of violence, some mild language, crude humor, or suggestive content than the everyone rating has. But it's not going to be to the same extent as a T rating. Aside from E10+, there haven't been any new ratings since 1994. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever really seen a game with an E10+ rating.
You know, I don't actually pay attention to the rating since I'm over 17 now.
Right. I only pay attention so much that I have a rule in my classroom that we don't talk about M-rated games. So it's kind of a matter of if it's not an M-rated game, I don't pay that much attention.
Right. The next rating is T or teen. Games with this rating contain content which the ESRB believes is generally suitable for those aged 13 years or older. They can contain moderate amounts of violence, including small amounts of blood, mild to moderate use of strong language or suggestive themes, sexual content, and crude humor.
So basically, if you're a parent out there and you really don't want your kids getting exposed to that sexual content, it might be a good idea to steer really clear of the T rating or check out the box that we're going to talk about in just a little bit.
I think what they're probably talking about in mild sexual content is probably
risque dressing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yep. The next rating we're going to talk about is the M rating. That's M for mature. These games contain content that the ESRB believes is generally suitable for those that are 17 years or older. They have content with an impact higher than the teen rating can accommodate. They include intense and or realistic portrayals of violence, such as blood, gore, mutilation, and depictions of death. They have stronger sexual themes and content, they have partial nudity, and they have more frequent use of strong language.
The next rating is something that really does not pop up a whole lot. It's AO, or adults only. This is 18 plus. Games at this rating contain content which the ESRB believes is suitable for those aged 18 years or older. They contain content with an impact higher than the mature rating can accommodate, including strong sexual themes and content, graphic nudity, or extreme portrayals of violence. The majority of adult-only rated games are adult video games with pornographic content. The ESRB has seldomly issued this AO rating, and honestly, if a game developer were to make a game that is AO rated, it is known as the kiss of death for that game. A lot of stores will not even accept the game, and usually you can only purchase games like that online.
And there are honestly a few games that I'm surprised don't have this rating.
It's kind of like in movies, where they'll just go right under the rated R rating. A lot of developers will just push the envelope, but they want to do everything they can to avoid that AO rating. Like I mentioned before, there was one example in recent history, I can't remember how many years ago, but it was GTA San Andreas when it first came out. It was rated M for mature. People might have heard of this hot coffee mod. And what it was is you could date a girl in the game and you could take her back to your place. And even though you'd be fully clothed, there'd be some questionable content there. But the hot coffee mod, even though Rockstar, who makes GTA San Andreas, initially intended to put it into the game, they took out the code that actually activated this sequence. But through modifications, people were able to put it back into the game. Modifications of this game, it's actually illegal.
So I have a question in the content, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but does it actually show anything, or are they kind of...
No, it does not actually show anything. I mean, they're fully clothed models. They're, again, this was like 10 years ago, so
15 or so.
Yeah, heavily pixelated, so you couldn't really... It wasn't anatomically correct. There was a game named Ride to Hell Retribution. It's a current... Well, I believe it was a last-gen game. But they do show the same exact content as GTA San Andreas, the hot coffee minigame. But that only has an M rating.
Wow.
I'm surprised that the ESRB has not issued an adult-only rating. Of course, from what I hear, the game isn't actually that great, so not a lot of people have played it.
You know, this kind of makes me wonder, because Grand Theft Auto 5, it's the same strain as Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. They actually have where you can see male and female anatomical body part, but that game is rated M. I'm very surprised that that game did not receive an AO rating, and in addition to all of the extreme violence that game has.
I would agree that it's very questionable content. AO, I think, is kind of pushing it because it's above the waist, not below the waist. At least
not on the male models. Not
on the male models. For some reason, they can show that. It's just female below the waist. That is off limits. Male below the waist, for some reason, they deem it okay, and I'm not sure why.
And I don't understand that, because even 5 years ago, none of that was okay.
Right, not even above the waist was okay.
Right, especially on females. And I almost wonder if Grand Theft Auto, if the only reason it hasn't received an AO rating is because of how popular it is. It does make a lot of money with its sales.
Yes, Grand Theft Auto 5, which has been around for a long time.
And it's still quite popular.
Is still making a lot of money for Rockstar.
Along with ratings, there are also a few lines that can give you a general description of objectionable content in the video game, and these are usually going to show up in a black box with gray font. And Chris, would you kind of explain to us our example from actually Grand Theft Auto 5?
Yes, Grand Theft Auto 5 is rated M, and on the box it actually says 17 plus, and it gives a few descriptors of why it's rated that. In the case of Grand Theft Auto 5, it's intense violence, blood, gore, nudity, mature humor, strong language, strong sexual content, and use of drugs and alcohol.
And I will say in that game, it's not just the use of drugs and alcohol, it's the glorification of it, as well as the glorification of the violence and of many things in that game.
Yes, and playing the game, the mature humor really comes out.
Oh, yes. So, retailers don't legally have to comply with the ESRB.
No, they do not. I believe in California they passed, or they were trying to pass a law that said the retailers do have to comply to this, but they do not have to comply legally with the ESRB, but a lot of retailers do. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was working at GameStop about 15, 20 years ago, if you sold a young child a T or M rated game, it was $5,000 fine for you, plus your job.
And I can remember the first time I ever was even exposed to the idea that there were ratings on games. I was actually trying to buy a Christmas gift for my father, and I was trying to get him Rainbow Six something. I don't even remember which one. It was one of the earlier ones, I think. And I went into the store. My mom had given me $50 and said, just go on into the store and pick a game out for your dad, and we'll meet you at the food court or something so your dad won't see what you bought him. And I go in the store and I say, I want to buy that game for my dad for Christmas. And they actually wouldn't let me purchase it. I think I was 13 or 14 years old, and I was like, what? But I'm buying it for my dad. And they said, well, you have to have a parent come in with you. I think that the way my parents raised me with the games, I had been playing M-rated games to a point for at least 4 years by that point. But I always played them with my parents.
And M-rated games, when we were kids, if a game was rated M,
it was just for the violence.
It was just for the violence. At that point in time, there wasn't as much high definition. There wasn't as much polygon count or anything. I think that an M-rated game for us as a kid would probably be an everyone game now, or an E10 plus game now.
I think it would be a T game for us now. And you know, when I say it was just for the violence, it's not that I'm downplaying the violence, but it was very pixelated, and I can't remember a single game that I played as a child. Of course, I never played Doom, so that would be a little different. But I can't remember a single game that I played that ever had blood or gore. Where I would play like Wolfenstein, there wasn't blood.
Since we grew up with games, I think the industry kind of grew up with us.
With our generation.
With our generation. There weren't a lot of mature games when we were children.
And as such, the adult gamers at the time, who have now aged into being grandparents, they may have stopped playing video games in the last 20 years or so. The games haven't stopped growing.
So they think that the games are just as they used to be when they stopped playing games.
Mm-hmm. And they figure, well, my granddaughter Susie, she likes playing video games, so I'm going to go and get her this game, and I think she's going to have a ball with it.
Right.
And Susie's mom might walk in on her playing it one day and be like, where did you get that?
From Grandma. And the mother might say, oh, okay, it's from grandmother. It must be suitable.
It must be fine. And so we get a whole cycle of not even necessarily understanding what we've just inadvertently given a child.
Right. One of the other instances that I don't think the ratings actually touch is how frustrating some of these games can be for a child.
Or even for an adult.
Yes, for an adult.
I mean, Darksiders.
Dark Souls.
Dark Souls, okay.
Dark Souls.
Dark Souls, the one that you won't allow me to play
because apparently
you
is
like
for
our TV.
Xbox 360, and
okay.
We like that game.
See, he won't let me play Dark Souls because apparently he likes the TV or something.
Yes, I do. But if you ever go back and play recent games such as like Cuphead is one good example. That is how hard games used to be. Games have gotten a lot easier, and I think that's probably due to, well, one, North Americans don't have as much attention span as they used to, but also because the frustration level, and games have moved from kind of like a niche in society to more of a widespread
a mainstream
hobby, pastime, whatever.
Yeah, to be a gamer now is no longer to be a person who is deemed unsocial. It's a norm now. It's something that almost everyone has had an experience with. And so the game developers have tried to make the games more
approachable by many.
And easier,
yes.
I think. That doesn't mean that the games aren't hard. That doesn't mean that you're not going to find some hard games out there. And we'll talk about some of those in some of our future shows. But, you know, here's the deal. We're coming up on Christmas. We know that you're running to look for gifts for your loved ones, whether it's children in your life or adults in your life. You know, if you're stuck and you don't know much about the gaming industry, that's okay. You know, you can ask an associate at any GameStop and most Best Buys for advice. You can say, hey, I want to buy this for my 11-year-old nephew. Is this something that's going to be appropriate, or can you give me a recommendation? He likes Pokemon or he likes Dragon Ball Z, and they're going to be able to give you some great recommendations. And you can also, if there are customers in those game aisles looking at games, feel free to ask them, because 9 times out of 10 they're going to be pretty friendly about it and say, you know, I would actually recommend this one. I would say that this would probably be a great game for them.
Yes, I don't know how many times we were actually in Walmart or Best Buy and we just overhear something where we just pipe in and we tell them everything they need to know about it.
And usually we make some recommendations, and usually they walk out of there with a couple of games for their loved one that they're purchasing and a little bit of education on top of it, and that's never a bad thing. It's something great to learn something new every day. You know, go ahead and tune in next week or next time, and we'll do some more shows. We're going to talk about specific games, those games' ratings, the reasons they got those ratings, and their frustration levels. Don't forget to push the red subscribe button and comment on games you want to hear about. Let us know if there's a particular game you've been wondering about or debating about buying, and if we've got it, we'll play it, and if we can pick it up, we'll pick it up and we'll play it, and we'll let you know about it. Join us next time.